Hello, this is Dr. Robert Faust, and this is a series of information that I've used at seminars in the past, where I usually speak with them in the background and explain what it's all about. The important thing to remember is we're going for sustainability. One, that means continual production for generations on the same land. And then we're also going for maximum economic yield, not maximum bins and bushels or maximum tonnage at no consideration of the cost, but the maximum economic yield. That's getting the most bushels for the least amount of input cost, which makes it far more ecological and economical. So, how do you do that? Well, just listen to this video. It'll give you a pretty good idea how that can happen. The thing of it is, the way input selection and the way our farming system works, it's kind of an industrial model that's sort of pushed on the farmers over the years, and the resulting is there's way fewer farmers and farms, and way bigger tractors. And so, whatever, it hasn't helped the farmers because there's way less farmers. So we go back to sustainable practices and biodynamics. And biodynamics has already been shown in research, at least in Switzerland, to be the most, provide the economical yield, the maximum economical yield, lowest cost per bushel per bin, and with the highest nutrition. I'm going to consider that. So what we're trying to do is find what the limiting factors are and correct them. But it's always going to be a limiting factor if you don't have microbial activity like fungi, like especially mycorrhizal fungi when we're talking about phosphate availability. It's not really the fertilizer salts that feed the plant. It's the microbes that feed in front of the plant roots. That's rhizophagy, and sort of feed the plant by its own indigenous bacterial and fungal association. And that's the mycorrhizal fungi. So the problem with phosphate is availability. There might be tons and tons out there, but it's not making it into the plant. So when they give you that fertilizer deal, it gives you that free soil test that always says you got low available phosphate. You just throw some more on. Well, it becomes deactivated very rapidly back into a tricalcium phosphate or iron phosphate. It's reactive as a salt and it ties up. But it takes microbial activity, especially mycorrhizal fungi specifically, make phosphates available to plants. And then humic substances and silica have to be present. Without humic substances, there's no biological activity, and therefore everything's just sitting there inert, and you have to provide it as salts, as soluble salts, like hydroponics. Whereas if you have a microbial activity, especially fungal dominance, you get chelation effects, you get mycorrhizal fungi, and it releases this tied up phosphate. And there might be enough there for generations because people have overdone it over the years. Of course, it ends up polluting, rivers and lakes. You get eutrophication. So, yeah. And plus, phosphate sources are getting low worldwide. It requires mining, kind of an environmental impact type of mining, and then the preparation of rock phosphate into phosphoric acid, and they also use that phosphoric acid to make glyphosate. And there's a lot of fluoride in rock phosphate. So if you need it, though, you might need it, but that's not what we're talking about. Because in every case that I've been involved with for the last 50 years, where we had low available phosphate, P1, but we had a fairly high P2, which is the next phase. It's not as available, or it's unavailable. And in all cases, just the application of humic acids alone, humic substances alone, either raw or solubilized, based on leaf analysis, increase the phosphate to optimum levels. And I've never really seen a case where it didn't. So humic substances really influence phosphate availability. And that's the big problem I had to first deal with when I was working with farmers in Montana. And yeah, and that turned into my work with humic substances, because we used rock phosphate, but still had barely any effect on the uptake. And then we had to go into humic substances and sulfur, because the soil there was completely sulfur deficient. Nobody was thinking about that. And so phosphate availability isn't going to be there either if you don't have soluble silicates, silicic acid, present. And in many places, like for instance South Africa, they don't apply phosphate if they have low silica. And a lot of times, I've seen this in Hawaii and a lot of places, it really respond to silica, but it has to be in the silicic acid form, and it's a major limiting factor. So you're looking at things, they're focusing on one thing because that's what they're selling, you know. But really, it's about availability, and that requires humic substances and soluble silica to be present. And then hopefully, if you don't have it, you inoculate with mycorrhizal fungi. And it's easy to test for it, whether you have it or you don't have it. And it also shows up in the bee crop test you might do after to verify all these biological effects and where you're going. We provide that test. But the humic substances have been used all over the world. I mean, it's the basic bridge between the living plant root or cell, really, and the dead mineral matter of the soil. It's the difference between the earth and the moon, really. They produce substances that affect pathways that provide resistance to diseases, insects, and also provide growth regulator auxin production internally in the plant. It activates. It's like a switch you turn on. And that's from substances that are in the humic substance itself. One of the 800 different compounds that are in humic substances, or humic acid, humic acids with an S. Because the full humic product we sell, it's called full humic because it is the full spectrum, including a high level of fulvic acid. Without that, it's not the same thing. Fulvic acid feeds the plant directly, either as a foliar or through the roots, and the humic part feeds the soil fungi, the soil microbes, over a long period of time. It provides a crucial need, and without it, you get a bacterial dominant soil that turns to cement. And you really have to dose it heavy with the salt fertilizers, and then you go to town and get a job at some point. But here's some of the first work I did with humates in Montana, and this is on potatoes, seed potatoes, and the results were phenomenal. It's what got me started, got me excited. What is this stuff? What's humic acid? It was raw humic acid from New Mexico, and it a couple 100 pounds to 300 pounds an acre. And the main thing was there wasn't any insect damage where we put it, because we split a 40-acre field. And the results were just mind-boggling. There's the picture was back there. But so I learned, but we didn't know why it worked. We just know it did. But it is priming the soil food web. So you're putting that on. It's like something that was missing that just turns on all these activities, and people eventually see increased earthworm activity, or they see earthworm activity they didn't see before. So you start off with seed treatments, using microbial products like the VAM products, of BIOAG, that has trace elements and biostimulants in it, and that's applied in the planter. And then you come back in with, if you're going to use nitrogen, if you're not organic, you use urea and nitrogen, which is a lesser of evils, I think. You mix that with full humic powder, and then that prevents ammonia loss, and you get more benefit from the urea, less loss from volatilization or other effects in bonds to the ammonium ion that you're going to get, pretty quick when you put urea on the ground. And then you use the TM7, which it's got the 7 trace elements. It's a big missing link. That's the other missing link I found. And it depends too. It'll vary from place to place, but we make custom forms of this TM7. Some areas don't need the iron, or they don't need the manganese, or but they need a higher zinc. So that's something that we can test and determine what it is. But so that's the next big thing, is those trace elements, and TM7, which is chelated, is humic substance that have digested or chelated these elements: iron, cobalt, molybdenum, zinc, vanadium. I said cobalt. So fulvic acid is the low molecular weight of humic acid. It's yellow to gold, and it's been tested all over the world. Here's some work from China, northeast China, on wheat, and the results are incredible. They've shown it to be anti-frost, frost and drought. That's their big focus. So protecting the crop against early frost and also drought. As a matter of fact, it's pretty dramatic. I've done a lot of testing myself with that. The plant just looks like it's, you pull it out of the ground and it'll stay, looks like it's fresh for a while. People have noted this over the last 50 years that I've been doing this, that like carrots, everything stays better. They'll just, instead of a potato rotting on the shelf, it just turns into a mummy. And apples and other crops, just the shelf life is better. There's more sugars, and that's the reason for a lot of the effects, like the the anti-drought effect is because, and the anti-frost effect is because there's more sugars produced in the plant leaf, and that protects against frost and drought. And also, in many cases, it repels insects, and there's other things involved with it. But it's obvious people have used our products, the full humic and TM7, and they say, we don't even have insect problems anymore. And the same with my own experience growing all kinds of crops every year. So the basic principles is we feed the food web to feed the plants. So the fungi and bacteria live in and around the roots, and they move ahead of the roots, converting soil minerals, elements, and soluble forms the roots can take up. And of course, we've said for years that humic substances stimulate soil microbial activity, and we noticed earthworm activity at some point, but we could never prove it. It sounds anecdotal. It's like woo-woo. But now we have the test, the DNA, the bee crop test, where they have 45 million microbes in a database and use artificial intelligence and DNA testing to show me what distribution of microbes we have, like mycorrhizal fungi, fungal dominance, bacteria levels, diseases that are present in the soil, and nutrient availability, just a lot of factors that we had no information before. It was all guess and smell, but now we can prove it. We can prove exactly what I'm saying, that the humic substances, humic acid products like full humics applied to the soil can turn around the bacterial dominance to fungal and increase all the good properties, including drought and frost, and increase the yield across the board. I mean, there's been research all over the world showing this. Chinese are kind of ahead of everybody on it, but I've done 2 different tests. This one was published, but here it shows what the pathways that are activated that provide the, and then even the increased longevity. Here's phosphate solubilizing fungi. Here's the result in the field.
Here we are where we used dry humate pre-plant, quite a bit of it, spread out here pre-plant. So here's the rye. You can see here's my stick. So this was put on here last year, showing the long-term carryover benefit of humic substances. And then here's where we didn't put it. So which crop would you have? Which would you rather do? Of course, we'll see a big, gigantic difference when the yield at harvest. But okay, let me just walk over. Here's without humate. We're not worried about organic matter, just chemical fertilizers, salts. We're good. You know, that's the mentality. Okay, so here's large applications, optimum application of humic, full humics. That's humic, fulvic, the whole spectrum right here. Here's without, here's with. So, if you don't believe your own eyes, well, there's nothing I can do. So this shows the extent of the field here of rye, but I'm going to compare this field, which was used humates, humic acid, VAM, BIOAG products, and BIOAG management for the last few years, and we're going to go over to the field over on the other side of the road, which had none of that, and it was planted with rye the same day. Here we can see the difference. So here's my indicator stick. You can see the thickness of the rye, and it extends, you know, pretty uniformly in this particular test plot. But you can see the leaf width. That's the key. In grain and barley and corn, you'll see a wider leaf blade in response to humic substances. Also, you'll see a cleaner leaf. Now here's where they damaged the leaf with herbicide spray. You can see the burn, because they insisted on spraying this unnecessarily. Okay, so here we are in another part of the field, and this is the untreated, without the mycorrhizal, without the full power fulvic on rye. Same day. So we walk over here. Okay, here's the untreated. Boom. Here we are in the treated. And you can see a difference in color, bigger on the rye. There's a spray plane going over, delivering rescue chemistry to farmers who did not use humic substances. And notice we have no insect damage or any fungal diseases here. That airplane that just flew by, he's going out to spray fungicides, because they play crop rescue chemistry here. Humic substances tends to provide not only resistance to plants, but also to humans. Here we are in the Faust BIOAG farm. This is a crop of rye, biologically grown rye, using Cyto Plus foliar and VAM
You can see the size of the field.
And I'm
about
6 feet 4 inches tall. This is about 6 feet tall where we sprayed.
It's a good 6 feet tall where we sprayed, yeah.
And then further down this way, it goes down a little bit. Shorter,
Here it's much shorter.
thinner stalks.
Yeah, thinner stalk. And you can see the beginnings of lodging, where it's kind of falling and tangling a little bit. The heads aren't as big, the grain is smaller. Oh yeah, the heads are definitely smaller. Go over there and grab a head and we'll compare the heads.
I'm gonna make a couple of heads so from here,
Yeah.
and then the head from there.
So yeah, this was ground had humate supplied and coming off of a vetch cover crop. So so here's the difference. It's not just the height. You don't get paid for that. It's the number of grains per head and the size of the head, and you can see a big difference. Big difference. Yeah, there's your treated
There's a difference too.
in height.
It's non-treated.
Height and size of the stem itself. That's with, that's without. So yeah, it's a difference between like losing money and maybe making money on your crop.
Okay, here we are where we used dry humate pre-plant, quite a bit of it, spread out here pre-plant. So here's the rye. You can see here's my stick. So this was put on here last year, showing the long-term carryover benefit of humic substances. And then here's where we didn't put it. So which crop would you have? Which would you rather do? Of course, we'll see a big, gigantic difference when the yield at harvest. But okay, let me just walk over. Here's without humate. We're not worried about organic matter, just chemical fertilizers, salts. We're good. You know, that's the mentality. Okay, so here's large applications, optimum application of humic, full humics. That's humic, fulvic, the whole spectrum right here. Here's without, here's with. So, if you don't believe your own eyes, well, there's nothing I can do. So this shows the extent of the field here of rye, but I'm going to compare this field, which was used humates, humic acid, VAM, BIOAG products, and BIOAG management for the last few years. And we're gonna go over to the field over on the other side of the road, which had none of that, and it was planted with rye the same day. Here we can see the difference. So here's my indicator stick. You can see the thickness of the rye, and it extends, you know, pretty uniformly in this particular test plot. But you can see the leaf width. That's the key. In grain and barley and corn, you'll see a wider leaf blade in response to humic substances. Also, you'll see a cleaner leaf. Now here's where they damaged the leaf with herbicide spray. You can see the burn because they insisted on spraying this unnecessarily. Okay, so here we are in another part of the field, and this is the untreated, without the mycorrhizal, without the full power fulvic on rye. Same day. So we walk over here. Okay, here's the untreated. Boom. Here we are in the treated. And you can see a difference in color. Bigger. There's a spray plane going over, delivering rescue chemistry to farmers who did not use humic substances. You notice we have no insect damage or any fungal diseases here. That airplane that just flew by, he's going out to spray fungicides because they play crop rescue chemistry here. Humic substances tends to provide not only resistance to plants, but also to humans. Here we are in the Faust BIOAG farm. This is a crop of rye, biologically grown rye, using Cyto Plus foliar and VAM. You can see the size of the field.
And I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall. This is about 6 feet tall when we sprayed.
It's a good 6 feet tall where we sprayed, yeah.
And then further down this way, it goes down a little bit. Shorter.
Here it's much shorter.
Thinner stalks.
Yeah, thinner stalk. And you can see the beginnings of lodging, where it's kind of falling and tangling a little bit. The heads aren't as big. The grain is smaller. Oh yeah, the heads are definitely smaller. go over there and grab a head, and we'll compare the heads.
I'm gonna take a couple of heads from here.
Yeah.
And then the heads from there.
So yeah, this was ground had humate supplied and coming off of a vetch cover crop. So here's the difference. It's not just the height. You don't get paid for that. It's the number of grains per head and the size of the head, and you can see a big difference. Big difference. Yeah, there's your treated.
There's a difference too.
In height.
It's non-treated.
Height and size of the stem itself. That's with, that's without. So yeah, it's a difference between like losing money and maybe making money on your crop.
Yeah.
So, if we're going to survive as a civilization, we have to understand what crop decline is and what those limiting factors are. And if we don't, we're just never going to make it. And it's only predicted that even at the present rate, we have 30 to 60 some crops left, unless we change our ways. But the main limiting factors really are humic substances, silica, and trace elements. And it really requires remineralization in many cases. Calcium's too low, pH is off, So liming is important in many areas. In other areas, it's important to use a acidifying agent, sulfur, ferrous sulfate, or basically humic substances, because they're amphoteric. They'll buffer a soil either towards alkaline or neutral, or acidic towards neutral. That's what happens in nature. You go down to the subsoil, it could be real acid or it could be real alkaline, but the topsoil is dark and it's more of a neutral pH. But sometimes we have to help it. Of course, using crushed rock dust is an incredibly effective method if you have it available. That's what remineralizes the soil after ice ages and leads to tremendous plant growth, and which starts to remove the CO2 or fix the CO2 in soil and carbon. And then things reverse. So now we're removing the CO2 so things can normalize in the environment. And it's better for everything. So the next thing that we'd have to do is consider the tillage methods, and also using nitrogen fixing crops that break up the subsoil, like vetch, for instance, or alfalfa. And of course, nowadays we don't have so much of the mixed farming, so we don't have the manure or the compost. So you really have no choice but to use humic acids for that, in that situation. What else are you going to do? I mean, a normal sustainable system is either going to be using a lot of compost generated on the farm from their own livestock, or purchased, which is expensive, and the hauling and all that cost in the application, or a relatively modest cost in using an optimum amount of activated soluble humic acid like full humics. And it was known many years ago that about 2 or 3 pounds of humic acid, pure humic acid, are equal to 10 to 12 tons or more of compost, of moist compost. So the humates are like incredibly concentrated source. It can be 60 or more percent, and 7 or 10, 12% fulvic acid. So the average compost is it'd be lucky to be more than 1 or 2%. So you're talking about something that's unstable too. It's not going to go right to work immediately, day one, which is what the activated soluble full humic will do. So if we're going to turn things around, we either got to become sustainable, understand farm systems and maybe biodynamics and mixed farming. I don't know if we're ever going to go back to it. Really, everything's turned into a monoculture and, a single crop, which is a recipe for disaster long term. It always is. These monoculture crops, you get a disease, they get wiped out. I mean, I've seen it here in the Willamette Valley. Many crops have come and gone. It's a lot of times it's soil diseases, and they lose resistance and get all kinds of problems. And it goes somewhere else, like out in the desert, like the apples, the cherries, the plums, and hops. A lot of crops ended up out in the desert where, they have a better chance against all the diseases because without humic substances, they lack resistance. So then it becomes a spray and pray where they're spraying every 3 or 4 days, this or that, hoping it'll work. And of course, the fungus and the diseases become resistant pretty quick after a few generations. And then they get the root diseases, root rot, typically. They don't see it coming until a tree falls over. But all these things can be prevented with mycorrhizal and other microbial activity enhanced, which will protect the roots. And that's exactly what mycorrhizae do. They were originally investigated as a biocontrol, root disease, and nematodes. So you have those two working hand in hand, root diseases and nematodes. Then you have decline, and this is across the board. Tree crops, particularly, is what I worked with. But the same principle is in field crops. It just happens faster. Like I worked on early dying of potatoes in Idaho. They call it early dying. Okay, what's causing that? Because if you can keep that plant alive until frost kills it, the yield can be way higher. If it dies in August, well, it limits your potential there. So what's causing that? Well, that's for another story. But I knew how to eventually, solve that problem. Yeah. And again, humic substances and remineralization, the right trace elements. You don't leave anything out. You find the limiting factors and you correct them. And that's how it has to be to work. So it's really simpler in some ways. It's just the problem is getting through the indoctrination of the chemical and fertilizer in university, land grant university dogma, because everything is about a story that they defend and a product or concept they want to support because they're supported by the big companies that give them the grants. That's why I like some of the offshore, some of the other countries' work. It's not so much funded that way. It's more real science, and not looking to. They're looking for a result in China. they need results. Something that works. They're not going to just fool around and try to support something just because big companies want to sell a bunch of it. So it's going to be humic substances. We're back to the humus theory of plant nutrition. That the change was made after World War II, World War One, that is, when the Haber process, they figured out how to make ammonium nitrate, and it was used for bombs and weapons. And then after World War One, what are we going to do with it? Well, you'll grow plants. It'll really, jump up a crop. So ammonium nitrate is that's the go-to, and it's polluted the soil, polluted the groundwater here in Western Oregon. But so that's the salt theory of plant nutrition, which is self-serving, uh, to sell the excess production or of the nitrates and other salts, phosphate salts, nitrogen salts, potassium salts, and that's like what goes on. You treat these minerals with acids or alkaline to make them a salt, so the plant can take it directly up. Okay, but the other theory is the humus theory, and that's where microbes, are producing humic substances, which is chelating things, so they can take them up, and then so they die and break down and feed the plant, or directly feed the plant by moving in front of the roots and making things available and soluble so the roots can take it up. And we know all this now. We can see it in the electron microscope and the new DNA testing. So, yeah, the salt fertilizer theory is really living in the past. I mean, it's a if it works so good, why are there so few farmers compared to what there used to be? We only have about way less than 2/3 of them are gone. So, who was it good for? So the point is, we had a system. The world had a system. Different cultures had a system that worked. And then in the last 100 years or so, we've gone into this monoculture, industrial, chemical approach, and we're losing it fast, losing soil, losing productivity, health problems. They're seeing all the different herbicides now are shown to cause either Alzheimer's or cancer, and so there's a lot of things that need to change. But bottom line is, if we don't change back to the humus theory of plant nutrition and building organic matter and humus and remineralization, we're not going to last. We're not going to be around. And 30 or 40 years. I mean, I'm not going to be around anyway, but your grandkids will. And the next generation, what about them? What about that? It doesn't seem like they're thinking about that much. How things are going to go, and they're not thinking about how a lot of cultures all around the world live sustainably for over 10,000 years without destroying the environment. And of course, somebody will jump up, some troll will say, well, yeah, they were burning the forest, they were blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but they had a sustainable system, and they did use fire to manage it, which is a good thing. In the case of the Willamette Valley here, they burned off brush and oak savannas. It stimulated growth of grass and legumes and helped the oaks. And they ate the acorns, and the elk ate the grass, and the deer. And it was, a good life for a long time until Europeans showed up, and that was beginning of the end for a beautiful, sustainable culture, society that neither planted nor tilled. They managed the stuff, foods in the environment in a very sophisticated way. And then you have practices in Polynesia and Hawaii where they were sustainable right up until European contact. An amazing feat, considering you're isolated in the middle of the Pacific and you don't have any metals. How did they do it? Basically, it's always the same story. It's about building organic matter, which is really building humic substances. So it's a little more sophisticated, and there's more to it. But I've studied cultures all over the world, and how did they do it? They found a niche, they found a set of plants and animals, and they made it work. And we're just burning through the land, just mining, soil mining, and moving on, not even thinking about. Now, I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying the majority. There's certainly a lot of good farmers that aren't doing this. But, to survive in the system, economics, they think they're forced to do it. But the answers are there. I think that's probably the good news. Uh, I think I can say that unabashedly that we do have the answers that I personally do. Uh, I speak from experience, and I'm growing crops every year. So, yeah, for the last 70 some years. So the problem is just getting people to pay attention, to understand like the science behind it and what's really going on out there. Is it just buy some stuff and throw it out there and spray the right stuff? And of course, that's what how they teach you in these ag colleges. Okay, day one you do this, you spray that, you apply this, then you come back. It's like a cookbook. It's a cookbook, whether you need it or not. And believe me, I've argued with farmers that they absolutely didn't need the pesticide. Most of the time they don't, but they feel like they need to. It's like a ritual. It's like this ritualistic behavior, which basically farmers have done for thousands of years. They have a ritual sacrifice, ceremony, or something. So nowadays it's like spraying. That's why I call it spray and pray, because they don't know what they're spraying and they don't know why. Sometimes they do. If they have a good PCA and you're in California, you might actually have a reason. But most of the time, it's just spray and pray. You know, we don't know what's going on. You might as well just call on the gods. To, that didn't work. Um, so now we have artificial intelligence, we have DNA databases, we can determine what the microbial balance is, and all kinds of factors, soil health, suppression of nematode diseases in the soil as a whole, not just like something that holds some nutrients and we test for NPK. No, there's way more to it. So I'll be talking about that in the future. Signing off.